All right. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, for 30 minutes.
Well, thank you. We go home every weekend, and in June when we go home to Wisconsin, what do we think of? What's going on in June? June is Dairy Month. In Wisconsin, it's Dairy Month around the whole country. Of course, last weekend I spent Dairy Month at Breakfast on the Farm in Winnebago County, Breakfast on the Farm in Manitowoc County, having milk, having all sorts of different cheeses. You know, whether you like Colby or provolone, cheddar or mozzarella, whether you like your milk pasteurized or raw, whole or 2%, whether you like cream cheese or just plain cream, Wisconsin is America's dairy land, and everybody's got to remember, June is Dairy Month. Woo! Now, on to our next topic. I've just been reading about a KGB defector, and what he wrote should be required reading for all congressmen and all young children. He points out, and his name, he's since died, is Yuri Bezmenov, but he was a Soviet defector in the 1980s, and when he defected to China. He gave an interview about the KGB, and he said things that I think are far different than what the average American thinks about the KGB. He pointed out that about 85% of the KGB employees were not spies. They were not going around looking for nuclear secrets or finding out more of our military. They were wide in the open. They were engaging in psychological warfare, subversion to destroy the American psyche. He pointed out that what they do is out in the open, if only the press would pay attention. Well, you can see he was a newcomer to America, as he thought the press might pay attention. But he pointed out that at the time, people might think we were at peace, but in fact we were at war. It was a war, a psychological warfare. Nikita Khrushchev said the same thing. He felt we would destroy America from within. It would not be a military attack that would destroy America. It would be America losing confidence in itself. Now, there are a variety of ways in which the United States is, in my mind, in danger. Last week we talked about the huge deficit, and President Biden, through a variety of bills last year, certainly put the value of the dollar at risk. You can say we're in danger because we're losing the value of the family. And of course, John Adams said that America, our Constitution, is built for a moral and religious people, totally unfit for any other kind. But we've got a situation here in which a group called Black Lives Matter, which had a lot to do with the Democrats maintaining their majority in 2020, that Black Lives Matter was opposed to the traditional nuclear family. And of course, they have a lot of allies here in Congress who presumably didn't object to that. So that's another way we could tear down America, through our growing welfare state, having more and more people without the psychological background of a family. We certainly have a problem with the southern border. No normal country could survive unlimited immigration. We see two things going on down there. We see over 200,000 people a month streaming across the border, and we also see, compared to past administrations, even people who break the law are not deported. So you could say that's another way we're being destroyed from within. It's not a military attack, but it is over 200,000 people who have not been trained how to become Americans, who have not had it drilled into them the freedoms that we should respect, and that we are a great country because our Constitution is supposed to, our great Constitution is supposed to have a limited government, guarantee us a limited government, and we are supposed to be self-reliant, and that's certainly a problem. We have the bizarre transgender movement, and I ran into a gal the other day who had literal surgery taking away some of her organs at 15 years old, puberty blockers. That's another way to completely try to blend the difference of the sexes, would be another way to destroy society. But what I'm going to focus on tonight is the Biden obsession with racism. You know, I think if there's one issue that Joe Biden seems most obsessed over, it's this idea that supposedly in the United States we're a racist country. He brought it up 4 times in his inaugural speech and talked about white privilege once. This year, in his State of the Union speech, again, Joe Biden talked about the racist police and how people have to, if you're a person of color, you have to tell your children to watch out for the racist police. So obviously this is an important message from Joe Biden. He certainly acted on it as well. Right now, his Department of Labor nominee, she may make it, she may not, claimed in the past that we are a society built on white privilege, kind of this bizarre hatred of white people that I thought was merely an academia, but Joe Biden decided to try to appoint someone head of the Department of Labor who felt that way. I sure hope the Senate rejects her. He's trying to appoint General Charles Q. Brown, head of the Joint Chiefs. He right off the bat said we have too many white officers. He wants to restrict the number of white officers in the military to 43%. In other words, he doesn't want qualified white people becoming officers because he's got some psychological problem there. And I think we have to pay attention to that sort of thing when it comes to the Biden administration. Not long, and this is not limited to President Biden, not long after he took office, both Senator Duckworth of Illinois and Senator Hirano of Hawaii threatened Joe Biden, saying they did not want any more white men. They were not going to vote to confirm any more white men in his administration. He met with them. They backed off that to a degree. But, and I should say, he shouldn't appoint white men unless they're gay, which gets back to this kind of obsession with breaking away with the traditional family that we sadly have among the Democrat Party right now. In addition to that, President Biden wants in his budget to have new equity action teams in all of our government agencies, the Department of Interior, the Department of Justice. These equity action teams presumably will enforce the type of thing that Senators Duckworth and Hirano wanted. They want to look at people's race before anybody gets hired. They want to look at somebody's race before they get a government grant. I think it's something that the American public is not discussing anywhere near as much as they should. It's kind of particularly ridiculous because, of course, you're never probably going to have a country in which more immigrants who have different ethnicity than the native-born have succeeded so much and are so accepted. You know, if you look around, the most successful ethnic group in America today are Indian Americans. You know, you look at other wildly successful groups, Filipino, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Cuban. Thomas Sowell wrote 40 years ago, I can't vouch for whether it's today or not, but that by the second generation, immigrants from the Caribbean of African descent outperform the average American. So at a time where the overwhelming evidence is that racism has very little role in America, Joe Biden is trying to elevate the potentially hard feelings by doing all he can by not treating people equally and looking at people racially. Now, I think we should have a discussion over this, and the discussion does not necessarily have to be in Congress, but it should be here as well. I think the discussion should be in periodicals, online, as people debate what the answers to various questions are. First of all, how long should this go on? Affirmative action, in other words, preferences based on race or based on sex as well, preferences for women, have been going on since 1965. So we've been going on with this thing 58 years. I have a feeling when Lyndon Johnson really kicked it off in earnest, there was a more mild policy under President Kennedy. But when it was kicked off by President Johnson, I don't think even he would have dreamed that this would have been going on for 57 years. But the question is, should there be a time when it ends? When we give people preferences or identify people by their ethnic group. What defines somebody of that ethnic group? Now, right now, we identify or put on the government forms African American, Latin American, Asian, Pacific Islander, Native American. What makes up a person in these groups? Right now, you self-identify. In the extreme case of Elizabeth Warren, who was something like a 64th or 128th Native American, she felt that was enough, that she should be a Native American. I think she's relatively rare. I don't think a lot of Americans would do that, though apparently it's legal. It was a way for her to become a professor in Harvard Law School. But what should be the cutoff? A 0.5%, 1/4%, 1/8? I mean, on the face of it, seems a little bit strange because a lot of these people, you would even never guess what ethnicity they are, but that's the way the system works nowadays, and we do have DNA tests nowadays. I think we should put some sort of standards as to who gets preferences. Then, where you come from. I mean, right now, if you're somebody whose ancestry was in Spain, and you come to the United States, you're considered a European. But if your ancestry is Spain and your ancestors spent 3 generations in Cuba, you're considered an ethnic minority. I mean, to me, that seems a little bit silly. I'm not sure what the difference is. Maybe the person from Spain just came here right now, and the person from Cuba, 1/4 Cuban, came here 50 years ago. So does this make any sense that when you fill out the forms or see who's going to get the government contract or who's going to get into Harvard Law School, that the person from Cuba is treated different than the person from Spain? Or if we have someone from Italy or somebody who was of Italian descent but spent 3 generations in Argentina, should that person be given preference? I think that's something we ought to have a public discussion over. Should you have to be from America? Right now, the way these programs work, if you show up, if you're not even a citizen, you can get preferences on the form. You have an example right now, the vice president's own dad came here from Jamaica. Originally at the time this affirmative action kicked in, I thought it was a little bit to make up for slavery or to make up for Jim Crow. Well, somebody like the vice president's dad, he wasn't mistreated in America. He wasn't in America at all. He came here for the land of opportunity, came here to become a professor at Stanford University. Is that fair? When we try to identify different groups as somebody who really never suffered in the United States at all because they're a recent immigrant, should they be getting these preferences? I think that's something that should be talked about. I don't know. Should there be a wealth component? We're supposedly helping the underserved communities, but the way the programs work today and the different areas that they pick out, I think, is government employment, employment in businesses that have do business with the government, government contractors if you have a business, and admissions to universities. Should there be a wealth component? If I'm the son of a multi-millionaire who's a member of a favored group, do I get preferences? It kind of seems wrong to say I'm an underserved group, but that's the way it works today, which is typical, and we'll come back in a second to what Thomas Sowell says about affirmative action. He wrote a book on the topic. Usually it benefits the well-off people, as things that come up from the progressive background usually do. Should there be some familiarity with your background? I mean, if I'm going to be claim to get preferences because my ancestors came from Peru, should I have to know something about Peru? Or can it be somebody who doesn't even know Spanish, has spent generations here, never lived in a Spanish country? Should I get preferences there? Should that have something to do with this? Are there jobs that should be exempt from preferences where it's entirely based on merit? One of the things that's going on in America today is a lot of medical schools are saying you don't have to take the MCAT test. Now, when I was younger, we used the associated doctors with the ones that did the best on the test, because if you were going to be a doctor, it was a matter of life and death. and we wanted to take the smartest person no matter what. Now we have medical schools saying we don't want to look at any test to determine your intelligence. We want to base your admission on things like what you say on an essay, or how many groups you volunteered for, that sort of thing. I think we should have that discussion. Maybe we should have this preferences for certain jobs like college professor, where you can say it's not a matter of life and death if we have somebody who's not as good, but we should make sure we always get the better people for the medical field, or for dentistry, or for airline pilots, or air traffic controllers? Or should we say, well, we can afford to have people who aren't as good as air traffic controllers, because what's the worst thing that could happen? But I think that's another question that we should be asking right now, because the Biden administration is clearly walking down this path. That's why they have these, what we're referring to as equity action teams. And we want to know exactly what standards the equity action teams are using. I had a fella come up to me a few years ago whose son worked in one of our federal agencies, and he loved the job, and he went to college for the job. He was told after 9 or 10 years, why you're not being promoted. He was told, you're a white guy who's not a veteran, and we give preferences to veterans too. Well, was that fair? Or if they are going to continue down that path, shouldn't we at least make it public so this guy wouldn't have gone to school to learn about a field that he wanted to excel in, only to be told 10 years later that, you're a white guy, you're not a veteran? Too bad. I think that's something that ought to be discussed before we hurt any other people. So in any event, I think this is a topic to look at. I think it's certainly one way to cause hard feelings in America. And I've talked about Thomas Sowell, who wrote a book called, a book dealing with affirmative action about 40 years ago now. But he pointed out that other countries that went down this path, America's not all the way down the path, but have the same experiences as America. First of all, it begins, and it's supposed to be temporary. 57 years later, it's still here. It's supposed to be restricted to maybe 1 or 2 ethnic groups, but here in America, first, people of African descent, then people who come here, never were mistreated in the United States, come here and are automatically given preferences based where their ancestors were born centuries ago. We begin to add other groups. And I want to make another point about why this is relevant, because Joe Biden is also trying to add another preferenced group. He wants to add Middle Eastern and North African people. Right now, I rattled off all the different backgrounds that we're supposed to be keeping track of, but we don't keep track of people from Algeria or Syria or Iraq. And Joe Biden wants to do that as well. So I think we should have a discussion there. I mean, there are not a lot of people in this country, background from those countries, but there are more and more people coming here. Joe Biden apparently says that if, you're from America and you apply for a job and we have an immigrant from Algeria or an immigrant from Iraq, people like that should be given preferences. Well, I think maybe that's something we should talk about here a little bit and see what the appropriate course of action is. Whatever the course of action is, it should be after a thorough public discussion, not just something, pushed in under the table because it's a sensitive topic. So in any event, I would ask the press to look into this situation. We want to find out what rules President Biden's equity action teams are operating under. We want to have a public discussion. Is it right to add North African, Middle Easterners to this topic? Should we give preferences to people who have no background of discrimination in America, people who just show up immediately get preferences? I obviously have my strong opinions, but I'd like to hear what the pundit class that so many of us read has to say. I'd like to see maybe sometime the Workforce Committee or the Judiciary Committee look into this and see what the different different viewpoints are, because it affects a lot of Americans, And that we're kind of moving down this train without having a public discussion. So those are my comments on that topic. I think it's a topic more people ought to look into. I think they ought to review how some people want to destroy America from within. I think they want to review what happened in other countries as they went down the affirmative action path, be it Nigeria, be it Sri Lanka, be it Malaysia or Singapore. And I think a lot of times it doesn't work out very well. But it's something we ought to have a discussion about. Nobody else is talking about it around here. So we throw that open for discussion. I'd like to thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like any time here? Oh, okay, so thank you very much.
Gentleman yields back.